Hello everyone. So today we are going to have our first lesson on variation and natural selection. Today we want to look at variation and how it occurs in living things, and we're also going to be looking at how variations are displayed in data. There are two types of variation: continuous and discontinuous variation. We'll be looking at some examples of those. We're also going to be looking at how variation occurs. There is a genetic reason for variation and also an environmental reason. We'll be looking a little bit further into that. And finally, we'll be looking at some examples of variation between different mammals caused by the climates that they live in. And that's just a little bit of revision from Key Stage 3. So the first part of that we're going to look at is continuous variation. So continuous variation is data which cannot be put into discrete groups. So the example we have here is height. Other examples would include weight and sort of lengths of things. Now the graph we have here is a histogram. Okay, now that is important to know. And the reason being that these bars are right beside each other. And the reason being is that we cannot actually sort these into groups. Okay, you cannot say you're exactly 174 centimeters, for example, here, but you're going to be pretty close to it. So whenever we measure it, it's very unlikely to find two people that are exactly the same height. Okay, there could be a few millimeters in difference, but we can sort of put people into man-made groups and organize that in the histogram. Now, if I was just to draw a line along these heights roughly, you'll see that it actually creates a curve shape. Now this curve you may hear referred to as like a sort of a normal distribution or a bell-shaped curve. Now most people are found around the center. So most people are going to be, in this case, around 178 centimeters tall. We do have extreme cases, so some shorter people around this 156 centimeter mark, and some really tall people around this 198 centimeter mark. But the vast majority of people are going to be found towards the center of this graph, okay, in this area here. Now the second type is discontinuous variation. Okay, here we have two distinct groups. You either can roll your tongue, shown on the right here, or you cannot roll your tongue. Okay, and reading from left to right, we have this 1:3 ratio. There is nobody found sort of in between the two groups. Okay, you either can roll, you can't roll. Okay, another example of this would be eye color. So your eye colors, although there's different shades, you can put people into discrete groups. You have brown eyes, blue eyes, green eyes, grey eyes. Okay, you do not measure your eye color. It's not a figure like 178 centimeters was for height. So here we have a bar chart this time for our discontinuous variation. Okay, so we've looked at the two different types of variation. And now we're going to look at an example of variation. And we're going to be talking about the relationship between seed size in wild garlic and percentage that will germinate successfully. Okay, and develop into young seedlings. Now this is an example of how traits become more common. So if we look at this far left, so our shorter seed size of around 3 here have a very low chance of germinating. On the other hand, if we go up towards 9 and 10, the seeds have a really good chance of germinating. So the seeds that survive are going to be able to pass on their genetics, and as a result, they're more likely to be found in the later generations. As a result, over time, we will see that seeds in this area will become more common. Seeds with this characteristic will become less common, and as a result, these ones here will become far less common. These ones here will be found around the center of our curve, and even larger ones will be found, but perhaps again less common. So before we look at our key stage 3 adaptations, we're just going to quickly talk about the different types or different causes of variation. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too long on this, but in general there are two causes of variation. There is genetic causes. So if you think about your own family or people even in your own society, you will share certain traits. For this reason, we can often recognize families as being families because a lot of the time, but not all the time, they look the same. If we look at one country, certain races will have similar characteristics compared to other countries or other parts of the world. And if you want to go a step further, you'll see that some animals share characteristics. So certain animals are a lot more like humans, mammals, than other animals, say for example, a fish. So the differences in our genetic makeup is obviously going to be caused by our genes. And as we get closer and closer to ourselves in terms of relations, we want to share more of the same things. The second type, so we've already looked at, just write this down here, genetic causes. Our second type is caused by the environment, and this links into our next task. So although you could have two twins that are genetically exactly the same, they may still have some differences. So if we go back to our previous example of height, that will be caused a lot by genetics, but the environment, the type of food you eat, where you're growing up, will also have an impact on your height. So the environment is the second cause of variation. So if we take two twins, for example, one lives in Spain, nice sunny weather, one's living in Norway, not as much sun, a lot colder. There will be differences between those two individuals despite the fact that their genetics are exactly the same. So if we just take one example, the twin living in Spain will more likely have a skin tan than the twin that's living in Norway, and that is caused by the environment in which they live. So just moving on to our last task, we're going to do some revision of Key Stage 3 adaptations. So this is just a little task for you to do yourself. So what is an organism's habitat? Okay, so again, that is something for you to look up and try and remember from previous learning. What is their environment? And again, these two things may be similar, but think about how these two terms are different. Our third one is, what does adapted mean? And give an example in your answer. And we actually have a little clue here of something we can use as an example of some animal that has been adapted. Number 4, what are Arctic conditions like? So obviously they're very cold. Give me a little bit more detail than that. Number 5, list some features of a polar bear that make it suited for its environment. So think about the Arctic conditions that you've listed. How does a polar bear adapt to survive in that condition? Question 6, what are desert conditions like? Okay, so we've got another example of a different environment. How is it different to the polar conditions? What are certain traits of the desert? And number 7, what features would a camel have to help it survive in that environment? So I'll give you one example. Desert conditions, we know that they are sandy, and so that a camel is able to adapt in that, it has got wide flat feet, and they stop the camel from sort of sinking into the sand. So just a recap of what we looked at so far, and just go back and re-listen if any of these points haven't stuck. So firstly, we looked at variation, the two different types, continuous and discontinuous. We should be able to give examples and explain the differences between those. We talked about what causes variation, and that's going to be genetics or the environment. And finally, we revised some key stage 3 adaptations, and these are some adaptations of different animals in different extreme climates. Okay, so any questions, just feel free to post and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.